I'll see if this shit works or not. I don't know if it will, but fuck it. Where do they have? Uh-oh. Not what I wanted. Go back. Do I have the ability to? Well, there's the chat. There we go. Test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What's it saying? I'm streaming what? Test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What's it saying? I'm streaming what? Test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What's it saying? I'm streaming what? Let's go see what the fuck else happened. That's again software and game development, right? Yeah. Okay. Let's check out Trovo. There we go. All right, so it looks like it's working good. There we go. All right, so the chat's working here. All right, cool.
Meaning code in some shape or form will revolve around server setup, aka HTTP module. So at that point, of course, I will cover every last bit of syntax in great detail. At this point, though, I think it's just a waste of our time. So if you're confused about something HTTP related, don't sweat it. We will return to that subject shortly and cover it in far greater detail. Now, if you're wondering why we bother with HTTP module at this point at all, since we're going to use it later anyway, you see, with the help of HTTP module, I believe I can show you some core features of Node in action and give you somewhat of a visual representation of them. Otherwise, I would have to base everything on slides, and I don't think it's the best approach. So, long story short, if you're iffy about something HTTP related, just please be patient, and I'll answer all your questions in the next course section. Nice. I think we've got a good initial understanding of how the file system module works in Node. And hopefully I did not lose too many of you. So hopefully there are still some students left in the course, because I fully understand that seeing this for the first time is probably a bit overwhelming. And what I would want to do next is cover the last initial module, the built-in module, and that is going to be the HTTP module, which is going to allow us to set up a web server. Now, please keep in mind one thing. We'll just cover the basics because the large part of this course is going to be creating your own server and setting up the API. Now, granted, we will use an abstraction on top of the HTTP module, and that is going to be the package by the name of Express. But the whole point is going to be exactly the same. That's why, again, we're not going to cover everything in greatest detail at the moment, because I don't see the point of repeating myself. And now I want to go back to app.js. I'll zoom back in just so you can see better what is happening. By the way, let me check my zoom level. So I'm going with settings, and I think that should do it. My zoom level is 2 at the moment. And then back in the app.js, let's grab the HTTP module and we'll assign it to some kind of variable as always. Let's go with a require, and we're looking for HTTP. That's the module name. And the method we would want to use is create server. Again, we'll assign this to some kind of variable. And in this case, the variable name will be server. Then we go with HTTP, create server. And this create server method is looking for the callback. And in that callback function, we have 2 parameters. And both of those parameters are objects. And since they're parameters, you can call it whatever you would want, but a common practice is calling them rec and res. Now, this first parameter represents the incoming request. So imagine a client is requesting from the web browser your web page. So you'll have information about the method and all kinds of useful stuff in that request object. And the response is what we're sending back. Now, we're not done. Of course, we'll set up more code here. But before we do anything, we also would need to specifically say what port our server is going to be listening to. And that's why we'll go with server and listen. So that's another method. And again, this is arbitrary, but I'm going to go with 5,000. Again, if this looks like a lot of gibberish where we have the request response as well as the ports, don't worry. Later in the course, I'll cover that in more detail, as well as show you some useful slides and all that good stuff. And as far as the response, well, we have a few methods. We have write, so we go with a res, and again, this is the object. And notice here how I'm not using the rec yet, so I'm not checking for anything. I'm just concerned about my response, and the method name is write. And inside the write, we just come up with some kind of text. And I'll say, welcome to our homepage. And once we have sent back the response, I also would want to end my request. So I'm going to go with res.end. And once we're done setting up the code inside of the callback function, now, of course, I would want to open up my terminal, clear everything, and we would need to spin the sucker up. And of course, the way we do that is node and then app.js. Since that is the file name, make sure that you save it though. So before I run, I'll save it. And then notice something interesting. Notice how we're not exiting. So previously, every time we ran the file, every time we ran node and then whatever the file name, we exited from the file, right? So node was done executing the code and we just moved on. Now, in this case, since we have a web server, well, what do web servers do? They keep on listening for requests. And actually, you want your server to always be up. And of course, if I go to my web browser and then I'll make this bigger, and if we go with localhost, and of course, in this case, we have 5,000, there it is. We have welcome to our homepage. So now, of course, we have effectively created our first website. Now, granted, it's very
Hold on, I want to look up some shit really quick. I want to find a different theme. I'm not too fond of this one. Yeah, that's fine. Do I have the ability to pull this directly through here? Let's see here. What did it say? Like plugin. There we go. That's a lot easier. Uh, it's all right, but a little bit not what I want here. So I want to make sure I got something I can use. That I like. Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Very basic, but at least we have something on screen. And before we discuss the external modules and actually set up a module that nicely watches our code and does the restarts for us, I also would want to showcase what we have in the request object. Now, this is going to be a giant object, so I'm not going to cover each and every property. However, I would want to showcase a property that gets us the URL. And what would be the URL? Well, that would be an address. And if you've worked with React or DOM, you know that, for example, for the homepage, we used /. And then if the client wants to go to, for example, about page, he or she would enter / and then the about. Now, in our case, notice how we're still serving the same content. So just to give you a quick introduction of the request object, as well as set up a bit more realistic application, we're going to go with the request. Now, again, if you want, you can log it. So we're going to go here with request, and you'll see that it is on a giant object. Now, since we made some changes, we do need to stop it. And then we'll go with node app.js. But notice how we're not right away console logging the request object. Why? Well, because server is waiting for those requests. So we need to go back to our browser and then refresh. And then, of course, once we navigate back, like I said, this is going to be a giant object with bunch of useful info. Now, what we're looking for is the URL property, because that URL property is going to tell us, well, what address client is requesting. So what endpoint the client is requesting. And like I said, for the homepage, the common practice is using simple /. So in here, we can set up the if statement where I say if request URL is equal
Oh
to
shit,
the
never
homepage,
mind.
then of course, this is what I would like to send back. And just to speed this up, I can tell you that we can cheat a little bit where we can just place everything in the end. And in my case, I'll just cut out my string. So we have res.end. So now we simply send the text. And now, of course, I also would want to check for the about or contact or whatever. So in here, let's go with if and then request an URL. And if that one is equal to about, then of course I can send different text. And as far as the text, I'm just going to say here is our short history. And then lastly, well, what happens if the user is trying to access a resource that doesn't exist on our server? So we'll have the about page, we'll have the home page. What about if the user is asking for a contact page that we don't have? Well, here we'll simply set up a default response. We'll say res.end, and just to make it interesting, I'll set up the template string, and I'll show you that if we really want to, we can also pass in directly HTML, and I'll say, oops, an exclamation point. I'll close my HTML. Again, please understand this is just a basic scenario. Of course, that's not how we'll be setting up our APIs or nothing like that. But just to give you a quick intro, we'll do it quick and dirty, where there's going to be a paragraph, and we'll say we can't seem to find the page that you're looking for. Page you are looking for. And at the very end, I would want to set up a link that allows the user to navigate back. So I'll go with href and I'll say /, which just means homepage. And we're going to go back home. Let's close our link. Let's save that one. So at the moment, of course, we have the.
Hold on, I need to see something. I know, I'm sorry, I'm getting this all fucked up.
Somewhat quickly. That's why a bit later in the course, we'll take a look at the alternatives, which are promises and async await. And I have to tell you honestly, for the remainder of
I
the
needed
course,
to speed the
we'll
video
use
up. It's too fucking
async
slow.
await because, in my opinion, it is just easier to work with. Excellent. And up next, we have HTTP module. But before we continue, let me just, at this point at all, HTTP module. In that, done, of course, in the end. And in my case, I'll just cut out the text to make it interesting that we are looking for. And at the very end, I would want to set up a link that allows the user to navigate back. So I'll go with href and I'll say /, which just means homepage. And we're going to go back home. Let's close our link. Let's save that one. So at the moment, of course, we have the about. And by the way, almost forgot. Yes, we do need to stop the server. And we need to go with node and then app.js. Refresh one more time. There it is. Notice how we don't have the about. We can't seem to have the page you're looking for. And that is actually a bit interesting because it should be available, right? And of course, the reason is because I messed up on the URL property. My bad. Let me do this one more time. And we'll stop the server here. Again, let's run node app.js. And now we should have, here's our short history. That's our about page. Then we have the home page. And of course, you're already familiar with our error page. So if I'll go with error or any kind of resource that doesn't exist, then of course we'll get the error page. And of course, we can bravely navigate back home and we go back to our homepage. That should do it for the quick intro of base modules. And now, of course, we are ready to move on to our next topic. All right. At this point, we're familiar with two types of modules, our own, as well as the nodes built-in ones. But just like in any good infomercial, I'll say, but wait, there's more. We also have access to the world's biggest code store. And before you seriously start questioning my mental state, imagine this scenario. You're building an app. And of course, as any good app, it needs to have a slider, just for funsies. Now, at this point, you generally have two options. Build it from the scratch yourself, or search on Google and copy paste someone else's solution. While I have no issues with either of these options, keep in mind that someone somewhere has struggled with the same issue, the need for the slider. And there's a good chance that that person was kind enough to build it and share the whole project with us. So our only job is to go through the docs and with the help of one command, just add it to our project. We can do that because when we install Node, we automatically also install NPM or Node Package Manager. And NPM enables us to do three things: reuse our own code in other projects, use code written by other developers, and lastly, share our own solutions with other developers as well. The NPM project is hosted at npmjs.com. Again, the site is npmjs.com. And here you can find everything starting with useful utility functions to full-blown frameworks and libraries. And as an example, if you're familiar with React, you know that React has the Create React app package. And of course, it is hosted on the NPM. A typical Node project will have more than few NPM packages installed as dependencies. And before we install some cool packages, let's talk about naming. NPM calls the reusable code a package. And a package essentially is a folder that contains a JavaScript code. Now, another names you'll hear are modules and dependencies. And to tell you honestly, at this point, all three are used interchangeably when talking about shareable JavaScript code. So don't be surprised if during the course I call them any of these names: package, dependency, or module. At the end of the day, they all mean the same thing. Lastly, let me just mention two things. First,
hold on one second. Where's the at? Stuff. My kid is going crazy. Oh shit. Sorry, I had to put a post on Discord really quick. And I'm back to focus on this though. Close it down, back here, back here. All right, cool.
there is no quality control in NPM registry. Anyone can publish anything. So it's up to you to sniff out the empty and useless packages. And yes, there are quite a few of those ones out there as well. A good indication of the security and usefulness of package is the amount of weekly download. If the number is high, meaning if it's popular, it's a good chance that it's a battle tested and ready to go. And that brings me to my second point. Remember the slider example we discussed in the beginning of the video? When it comes to NPM packages, there's a good chance that if there is a bug, someone else has already fixed it. And as a result, it's already fixed in the package, or there's a working solution. All right. So that should do it for intro. Let's start using Node Package Manager in our own project. And as a side note, if you want to search for some packages, just visit npmjs.com. And then, for example, if you're looking for the Bootstrap, you'll find the package. And of course, you can click on any of them. This will bring you to the docs, as well as weekly downloads and rest of the stuff. Once we're familiar with Node Package Manager, let's see how we can start using it in our own projects. And the good news is that it's much simpler than you would expect. You see, when we install Node, we also install npm. And because of that, we have access to npm global command. And you can check the npm version by running npm -- version in your terminal. Just keep in mind that the version most likely won't be the same as your Node's version, and that is totally okay. So you can either do that in the terminal or, of course, in the integrated terminal, and you can simply type npm and then -- version. I believe you can also check by --v. And there it is. Of course, now we have the version for our Node Package Manager.
Thanks for the follow, my friend.
And then we have two flavors. We can install package as a local dependency, and that just means that we'll only use that package in this particular project that we're working on. And the command for that one would be npm install, or I for short, and then whatever is the package name. So whether that is Bootstrap, Lodash, Express, or whatever. Or we can
1 second, please. Sorry, my kid is being super loud and whiny. He's being a little
install
whiny boy
dependency
today.
as a global dependency. And that just means that we can use it in any project.
I'll make sure he's
And
all
the
right.
command for that one would be, again, npm I or install, whichever method you prefer, and then -g. So this is going to be the flag, and then again the package name. Now, when you install something globally, most likely on a Mac, they will ask you for the sudo. So you'll have to provide the credentials. That's why you'll run sudo npm install and then -g, and again package name. As far as which one you'll use more often, that definitely will be a local dependency flavor. Because even though, yes, you can install packages globally with arrival of npx, there's actually less and less need for setting up something globally. That's why we'll focus on local dependencies first, how to set it up in our project. And then in a few videos, when we talk about npx, I'll cover why there's less need for setting up something globally. Now, there's one more thing that we would need to set up in our project as far as dependencies. So I know you're eager to start installing the packages, but let's just wait a little bit. And in the next video, we'll add that extra thing that we're missing right now, and then we'll be in good shape. And then we'll start installing every package under the sun. Excellent. We now know that we have access to the npm global command. We now know that in order to install the local package, we will need to run npm I and the package name. So what are we missing? Well, we're missing a file by the name of Package Json. And essentially, you can think of it as a manifest file that stores important information about our project. And there are three ways how you can create Package Json. First is the manual approach, where you just create a Package Json in the root. And please do that in the root if that's something that eventually you decide doing. And there, of course, you would need to create each property. Or there are two ways how we can automate this. And the first one is running npm init. And in there, they will just step by step ask you the questions. And if you want to skip it, you can just press enter. And the third way is running npm init with a Y flag, and then everything is set up as default. So I'm not going to show you the manual approach. It's just too time consuming. And we'll right away go with npm init. First, I'll show you the step by step approach. And then, of course, I'll show you how everything is set up by default using the Y flag. So go to your terminal and just type npm init. And there it is. Of course, now they tell you that there's going to be a walkthrough of creating a package JSON file. And the first one is the package name. And by default, of course, it is going to use the folder name. Now, keep in mind that if you eventually want to publish this package, then the name has to be unique. So you need to make sure that nowhere in the NPM you can see the package with the same name. And I'm just going to go with tutorial. As far as version, we'll talk about versions shortly. So I'll just skip this one. As far as description, whatever, again, it's just a default. Now, as far as the entry point, eventually we'll change it, but for now, it's good enough. We're going to go with one intro.js and then the test command, as well as Git repository and keywords and author and license. And we simply say yes, and we're in good shape. So now, of course, we have the package JSON file with name, version, description, as well as the main property, and of course, the scripts, author, and the license. Now, I'll remove it. I'll say delete, and I'll show you that, of course, you can skip all of those questions by simply typing npm init and y. And as you can guess, yes, of course, you can come here later and then just change these values. That's why it's definitely faster to just type npm init and then the y flag. So why do we need this package JSON? Well, because if I would want to install the package, the local package, now, of course, this package is going to be stored as a dependency. And to show you that, let's just go with npm. And you know what? Let me clear the console first. So we're going to go with npm I, and then we're going to go with the package name Lodash. And if you're not familiar with Lodash, it's just a utility library, and I'm just specifically using for installation purposes. There's no real reason to have Lodash for our own project, but it's just something pretty interesting that I would want to showcase. That's why we're using Lodash. And we run it, and notice how we installed the package, and check it out. Now, in the package JSON, we have dependencies property, and it's an object, and inside of that object, we have a package by the name of Lodash. Now, I'll show you in this video, or maybe in the next one, why it's so important to have this package JSON. But another thing that I would want to showcase, once we can see that we have dependencies property, if you go in your Visual Studio Code, and if you click on Refresh Explorer, what you'll also notice is this Node Modules folder. And in that Node Modules folder, this is where all the dependencies are stored. So if you don't have that folder already, npm creates it. So in our case, of course, we didn't have any dependencies. So when we install that first dependency, npm creates that folder, and this is where you'll find the dependencies. Now, notice something interesting, where for the Lodash, we only have one folder, right? So we have only one dependency. But when we need to keep in mind that, of course, there's going to be some packages that have other dependencies. And that's why I first installed Lodash, just to showcase that, yes, once you install dependency, of course, it is going to be in the Node modules. But if you'll try to install a package that is bigger, that uses other dependencies, you'll notice something pretty cool. Where if I clear my terminal, and if I'm going to run npm I and then Bootstrap, again, you can use any other package you could want. This is just to showcase how the packages work. We won't use the Bootstrap in this project. So once I install and once I refresh, check it out. Not only I have Lodash, not only I have Bootstrap, which I installed, but since Bootstrap is using jQuery as well as the Package.js, now these are installed as dependencies. And if you take a look at the dependencies property, now, of course, we have the Bootstrap as well. And again, the whole point of this video is to showcase why we would need package JSON. So we need it because we need to provide information about our project. And inside there, a very important property is the dependencies one, because in there, we'll just store the dependencies which our project is using. And then some packages are actually going to use more dependencies, and they will be automatically installed as well. In our case, that was Bootstrap. And just to give you a taste of the package, why don't we just navigate to app? And I'm going to do that below the comments. Of course, you probably would need to clean the file. And as a side note, the last module, the HTTP, I saved in a file by the name of 12 HTTP. And back in the app.js, in order to start using the module, in our case, I guess I'm going to go with Lodash. First, I would need to set up the variable. And common convention is calling the variable like so. and we'll set it equal to require. And now, of course, we have access to the Lodash. Now, this is the difference between node packages, like, for example, the HTTP or the file module or whatever, and the ones that you install, the external ones. The external ones, you always have to install first. If you won't install the dependency, well, Node won't be able to find it. So in our case, we did install the dependency, the Lodash. So now, of course, I can just assign it to the variable. And since Lodash is utility library, why don't we test out one of their methods? And I'm just going to go with items, and I'll create an array of arrays. So items is going to be an array. However, the items are going to be arrays itself. So 2, then 3, and then we're going to go with 4. And Lodash has this method, the flat and deep method, that effectively will just spit this back as a flat array. And the way we set it up, we just go with const, and I'll call this new items. And then since we have access to everything in this variable, now I can simply go with underscore here, dot, and then flat and deep. So flat and deep, and then we'll pass in the items. And now if we console log new items, and if I go to my terminal and just type node app.js, and by the way, I need to save it. So let me go back. I'll say node app.js, and once we run, check it out. In a console, I can see, of course, the 1, 2, 3, 4. So Lodash has the method by the name of flat and deep. We have access to it because we install it as dependency. And now, of course, I can start using it.
How you doing, Hellfire?
Now, we're
Doing
not
right?
going to use Bootstrap in this project because that would be too time consuming. Bootstrap was just used so you can see that some dependencies will have more packages. So once we install one dependency, there's actually going to be more dependencies. And hopefully you have a clear understanding of how we would set up Package Json, how we would install the package. And next video, I would want to showcase why having Package Json is so crucial and so beneficial when we are starting to share our project with other developers. Awesome. We have Package Json.
Is there a convention to name a variable in JavaScript? There are multiple conventions, and everyone will argue with you about what the best one is to use. But you've got snake case and camel case and all different types of different cases. But generally, I think the most widely accepted is shit. What's it called? Oh, why is there a convention? There is no particular reason, like from a technical aspect, as to why that I could give you. Primarily just because I'm ignorant on a lot of things, but two, I think it really just comes down to preference, and then that preference being taught to other developers as they've learned the language over and over and over again. But it's supposed to help with readability. I mean, I would say that in terms of JavaScript, the most difficult thing is coming up with proper variable names and adhering to whatever naming convention that your company or whatever else requires. Oh, you're not talking about specifically naming conventions. You're talking about specifically the variable underscore. So what he did here with that, let me go back a little bit. So I think here he used it simply because he wasn't going to pull out, like in this instance, when he was going to require this npm package, he wasn't going to destructure anything out of it, any specific section of it. And so I think that you just don't have to give it a name in this instance. Why? Otherwise, shit, can I move this? Otherwise, you would destructure like, you know, module 1 and module 2. So in this instance, like if you were going to do this, you would just pull out whatever modules you wanted to out of the whole Lodash package. So you would only require those 2 things just for efficiency purposes. I think that in this instance, because he wasn't doing that, you could just leave it with the underscore. But I don't think that people generally do that unless that's like a new type of, convention here. Because I think that what I have seen is you would just do constant Lodash equals require Lodash. In this case, if you were going to not have to destructure it and pull out individual packages, you would just leave it like that. But I guess that naming it its actual name is the same thing as using the underscore here. I'm assuming. I can't say with certainty, but I think that's what's happening. I should have said component, not module, I think, too.
Set up package JSON, how we would install the package. And next video, I would want to showcase why having package JSON is so crucial for our project. And you have the account. If you don't, please stop the video, create the account on GitHub, view basic Git commands. And my assumption is that since this is somewhat of a advanced course, you're already familiar with Git and GitHub, and you have the account. If you don't, please stop the video, create the account, and just use your favorite search engine to learn about the basics of setting up the GitHub repository as well as basic Git commands. So our task is to push this up to the GitHub. And now, $1,000,000 question: are we just pushing everything up, including the mode modules, which for the most projects is going to be somewhat big? I believe I just checked. In our case, it was like 9 megabytes, but trust me, it always gets way bigger than that. Or we would just want to send the code. And you can probably already guess that since I'm implying that the size is too big, that we'll have to push this up to the GitHub without the node modules. And we'll start by creating a dummy repo on the GitHub. So let me open up a new window. I'm going to go with GitHub, and I'll just create a temp repo. And then I'm just going to create a repo, and I'm looking for these 3 commands. Essentially, I would want to get that URL, the remote URL, so I know where to push it. And then inside of the repo, before we set it up as GitHub repo, first I would want to go with new file.
I missed what we did here.
And I'm looking for a temp repo. And then I'm just going to create a repo. So let me open up a new window. I'm going to go with GitHub, and I'll just create a temp repo. And then I'm just going to.
All right, let me do this really quick. I think it's the file, man.
Create a repo, and I'm looking for these 3 commands. Essentially, I would want to get that URL, the remote URL, so I know where to push it. And then inside of the repo, before we set it up as GitHub repo, first I would want to go with new file, and we'll create a git ignore. Because of course, what I would want is to place the node modules in a git ignore file, because that way they will be ignored by my source control, and I won't be pushing up this giant folder to the GitHub, because you'll see in a second that there is no need for it. So we're going to go with / and then node modules. And if you're not familiar with git ignore, it's just a file that specifies which files are going to be ignored by the source control. And in our case, as you can see, I'm placing node modules inside there. Then I'll clear my console. And
I don't know if I need to do all this shit, but it's fine. New file. Is that right? dot git ignore. Looks like it. YOLO. I don't even have a fucking nose modules thing here, but that's fine.
And I'll just initialize this as an empty Git repo, and then we'll add everything. So git add, git commit. We'll just say first commit, and then I'll copy and paste those 3 commands in order to set up that URL, the remote URL, and in order to set up an empty. Then I'll clear my console and I'll just initialize.
He didn't even talk about. Yeah, he didn't even say anything about installing Git at all. I didn't know if it comes with Node natively. But he didn't talk about that, period. Not one bit. I mean, I guess. Nope. Guess we'll install it really quick. I don't know why I have to fucking determine what I want to use. Whatever, dude. I'll never use it. Yeah. Let me save this. I have to close this down really quick. Close. 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 Exit. The fuck? There we go. Yay. I am going to just learn Node and Express, and then move on from Express to Next.js. Nothing in particular, just to learn.
Set it up as GitHub repo. First, I would want to go with new file and we'll create a git ignore in a git ignore file. Place initialize this as an empty git repo, and then we'll add everything. So git add, git commit. We'll just say first commit, and then I'll copy and paste those 3 commands in order to set up that URL, the remote URL commands. Git commit. We'll just say first commit.
Those are words. If didn't answer the question, I have no specific. I have no specific reason for learning it at all. I'm a little bit familiar with it already, just from I'm only self-educated, and I've made an app already, one for personal project, and I used a little bit of a Git, and excuse me, a little bit of Node and Express and Electron, and I dabbled a little bit in React and React Native and Redux and Vue.js. So I have a little bit of experience with it, but I never actually went through to learn it. So I'm just kind of go through and learning just the entirety of it right now. And the reason I'm doing Express and uh, Next.js is just because this somebody with a long that's been in the industry for a long time told me that it was good to know. So I said, fuck it, I'll just learn it. Uh, I really, really, really like Vue. I think Vue is super fucking awesome. I think it's easily the best framework I've seen and used.
First commit, and then I'll copy.
Yeah, I don't really know anything about C sharp. and any of its auxiliary or tertiary supporting packages or frameworks at all.
And paste those 3 commands in order to
Error failed to push some ref to github.com. But yeah. I'm not even familiar at all with any of that. What the f on here? Yo, what up? How you doing?
set up that URL, the remote URL. And once I have this in place,
I'm fine right now. Hi, do you know what is easy to learn for beginners? React versus Node? Well, I would say that learning React is not something you learn instead of learning Node or JavaScript in general. React is simply a framework built around JavaScript. And so I would just say if you're learning JavaScript, just go ahead and learn Node and Express as well. But React is a front end visual framework. So you use React to design how your end user is going to interact with whatever you're building. I think I said that right. But I mean, you also I think that it's probably good to just learn native JavaScript, right, vanilla JavaScript, and then learn how to use the framework on top of it. Mhm. And don't be worried about learning TypeScript, man. It's not even you're just making the JavaScript into a strongly typed language is all it is. It's basically the same thing. You just need to declare types. Um, so what issue am I having here? Unable to auto take email address. Got okay. Do I need to figure out a way to? Let's see here. Yeah, once you understand. Oh, thank you, handsome streamer. All right, so I already have the remote origin there. Don't need to do that. Source. Ref spec main does not match any, and then failed to push some ref to this thing here. I've never used this WebStorm IDE before, and I wanted to start learning it, so I'm completely unfamiliar with how it all works. All I did so far was create a branch or a new repository called node_tut, and that's all I've done. And then I did a git init and git add, and then git commit, first commit, and it said author identity unknown, and then I was supposed to use these three to push to an existing repository from command line. Well, let's look. Move this out of the way. I don't think I have anything in there yet. The video I was watching said to take these three and plug it in. So it does recognize the remote origin that it exists. Is there a way for me to determine if what branch I'm in from this CLI? I'm not familiar with all the git commands. I don't ever do this. Let's see here. The current branch main has no upstream branch. Let's see what the internet says. Oh, do git. Okay, we'll do git status. Oops. Let's see if this will open up the proper web thing here. So what was that? Can you explain what just happened or what we did to fix that? What I don't just so I don't understand from a technical aspect. Did that sign me in or not? Oh, here it is. Oh, okay, okay. Oh, perfect. Good.
Should be able to go back to my GitHub. And there it is. This is my repo. Now, probably your next question is, okay, so we pushed it up to the GitHub, but I can clearly see that in my app.js, well, technically, I'm using the load dependency, right? But we didn't push up the node modules folder. So how the person who is going to get this repo will be able to run the code
Oh,
in the
okay, handsome
app.js
streamer. That makes sense.
since there's no node modules, and you told us previously that we can only run it if the dependency is there. Well, let's check it out. I'm going to go with
Thank
clone
you, Hellfire.
option. So I'll just get the URL. I'll navigate back here, and I'll do that in desktop. Again, it doesn't really matter. We're just going to go with desktop and then git clone. Now I copy and paste the URL. I'll open up a new instance of my text editor, copy and paste. And this is where the magic happens. If we have package JSON, we simply need to run npm install. And what is going to happen, the npm will check for dependencies that we have in a package JSON and automatically set up that node modules folder. So if I go here, first of all, I can see that there has been some changes. That is already good news. That just means that I have my node modules, and if I refresh, check it out. So now, of course, I have my node modules folder. And if you have been using React applications, you're probably already familiar with this one, where again, when you are setting up the code, you're not sharing the node modules folder. And I can showcase that by taking a look at my React projects. And that's not what I wanted. I didn't want to look at my awesome picture. What I wanted is a React, and then let's go with project. And you'll see that in that repo, we have bunch and bunch of folders, and each folder has two more folders, final and setup. And now check it out. None of them have the node models, because imagine the size of this sucker. If I would push for every project, for every folder, the node modules. Instead, I have package JSON.
Oh,
So
let me
when
ask you guys
you
this.
get
I'm not super well versed in it, but how do y'all feel about the whole code pilot thing? I may be wrong in my understanding, but what my understanding is they used machine learning and artificial intelligence to basically go through Git and categorize different code snippets from all the things that have been uploaded that are public and open source, and then they are having users subscribe to get access to that to then use those free snippets from throughout Git. So they're taking open source work and they're charging people to use it. Which seems kind of shitty to me, if you ask me.
Repo, when you clone the repo or download or whatever, then of course you get the package JSON.
They're charging people to skim their previously coded things without having to peruse the repos yourself. Oh, so it doesn't go. So it's only your repos. It's not other people's public repos. Oh, it is collectively everyone's. I'm just saying, in my opinion, there should be some kind of, hey, we used your shit and we made money off of it. Here is your cut, at least.
And in here, these are the dependencies. And you just run npm install, and they are being installed. Okay. Hopefully, it is clear that's why it is so crucial to have the package JSON, because we can just share the code without dragging the massive node modules folder with us. We can simply just provide what packages our project
Like,
is.
if they put an MIT license on it, no, I code just fine without it, but the stuff I'm doing is so simple, it'd be the same effort. Yeah, I feel you. I just feel like it's kind of it's shitty in terms of from an ethics standpoint, in my opinion. Like, people that make these projects and put this code up for free for other people to use, and then another company is going to turn around and be like, you know what? I know you were doing this in good faith and good spirit, but we are going to somehow use your free work to make money off of it. I also I mean I can also see the reverse side of it, and it's I don't know. I mean, that makes sense for sure. Like I said, I'm ignorant about how all of it works and the ins and outs of it, so I could just have a limited viewpoint and really not understand.
Using. And then once we get the repo, then we just run npm install. That is the command. And then npm will install all the packages that are in the dependencies. Awesome. We're familiar with npm. We're familiar with package JSON. Now let's finally install the dependency that we'll use for the remainder of the course. And
The way I look at it, there are no other developers who are coding better than I am. I can understand that perspective.
that is no other than the Nodemon. And of course, if you want to get more info, you can visit the npm and you can search for the package.
At least until you run into Stranger, right? You know, I'm sure you know who that is, right? Oh, you don't? One second. That guy, he is fucking ridiculous. He's insane. At least I think he's insane. But he's definitely I think he streams almost every day on Twitch. He doesn't do it for money or anything. He just does it because He's bored while he's doing programming stuff or coding stuff. But I feel like he knows fucking literally everything. I've never seen a question that he can't answer.
But as far as the general setup, it's just going to watch our files and then restart our app for us. So that way we don't have to each and every time type node and then whatever the file name.
We're going to do Nodemon.
And we can install it as a simple dependency. That is definitely an option. But since I also would want to cover dev dependencies, we'll install that as a dev dependency. And the command for dev dependencies is following, where we go with npm and then I or install, whatever. And then we go with Nodemon. So that is the package name. And then you can either do -d. So that just signals that that is a dev dependency, or you'll see this save and dev. So again, whichever method you choose, that is really up to you.
I don't know the specific answer to that question, but I'm gonna err on the side of probably yes, if that's an actual thing.
But just remember that both of them will save it as a dev dependency. So let's install it, and then I'll talk about it. Well, why we would want to set up as a dev dependency. And the reason for that is because if we think about it, do we really need Nodemon in production? And the answer is no. When we push it up to DigitalOcean or Heroku or whatever, we'll of course use something more serious than Nodemon to restart our application. PM2 comes to mind.
It's an old database language I'm gonna have to use in my job. Is it an old language that they're using simply because they have been too lazy to update things? Or is there a specific technical reason why they can't? The guy in the video might not know about using the node cache, so don't pull the whole node repo from the internet. No, because it's high performance and optimized for storing medical data. Ah. Sounds like something that I'd probably remake in Go. I just started learning Go as well last week. I spent like 2 or 3 hours on it, learning all the syntax for it, and it was pretty quick. Very straightforward and easy. Like when you call npm install on your local machine, if you give the command to use your machine's npm folder specified for Node, it won't download the whole thing each time. Is that what if that's if is that if it's installed globally? I don't fucking know about this right now. Whenever you run npm.
Developing, yeah, that is an option. So in this case, we'll add right away Nodemon to the dev dependencies. Now, what else? What kind of packages we would add to dev dependencies? For example, testing packages. For example, linting. For example, formatting, and that sort of thing. Again, nothing stops you from jamming this in dependencies, but if you think about it, it makes way more sense if we add this as dev dependency. So we use it while we are creating the app, but then once it's in production, then we just
So like if you have a Docker container running Linux, you give it a file specified for Node. Then if you project calls npm install, it copies references the files instead of downloading them each time you do a build with the later build stage. Oh, okay, I see what you're saying.
share the dependencies that actually the app is using.
I don't think that we're going to get into that intricate of a setup with this lesson, this course.
Not the ones that we used while we developed the app. Hopefully that is clear. And once we have the package, we're almost there. Now we just need to understand how the scripts work in a package JSON. And at the moment, as you can see, we have the test one. We won't use that one. And inside of the scripts object, we just set up the commands. And as a side note, we can set up the command right now, even without the Nodemon. For example, I could go with start, and that command will be equal to npm, node, and then, for example, app.js. So that is my command. And once I save my package JSON, instead of running this node app.js, I can simply run npm and start. And there it is. As you can see, same functionality. I run app.js and I get back the array as well as the hello world. Again, we still exit the application. So it's not like we're out of the woods, but I'm just showcasing that, yes, we can set up the commands. And then in the command, we just provide a value. And in this case, of course, it is node and app.js. Now, for some commands, you can simply type npm start, as you can see. But for some of them, you'll have to provide the full value, and that is going to be npm run. And in order to showcase that, I'm going to go with dev, and that one will be equal. And in here, we're going to go with a Nodemon and then app.js. So instead of running node, like we're doing in the start, now I'm setting up a dev command. And in order to run this one, I'll have to go with npm run and then whatever is the command name. Again, some of them you'll be able to use the shortcut where you go with start, and some of them you'll have to go the full route with npm run and then whatever is the command. And as a side note, yes, you can still run npm run start. This is also going to invoke the command, but in our case, we have dev, and in here I have Nodemon and then app.js. So let's try it out. Let's save first the package JSON, and you should notice something pretty cool, where if I go with npm run and dev, now I'm spinning up the Nodemon. And it tells me that Nodemon is watching my application. And since I know that, of course, we can test it out, where I'm going to go with console log. And then instead of the hello world, which I have after new items, I'm going to go with hello people. And you should see something interesting, where once I change the text, yep, Nodemon restarts my app. And now, of course, my value is hello people. Awesome. So now I don't have to type every time the node and then whatever file name. Nodemon automatically just restarts my app, and I simply set it up as a script. Now, if you want to change this around, if you don't want to run npm run dev, you can simply say Nodemon and then app.js and just remove the dev one completely. And as a side note, again, if you have worked with React projects, you are familiar with this setup, because for React, again, we run npm start, and then there's a value that spins up the whole React dev server where we can see our application. Not bad, not bad. Well, we're still on a roll. Let's cover how we can uninstall the package as well. And as a side note, if you want to stop the Nodemon, just press again Control and C. Notice how we're, of course, stopping the Nodemon. And again, if we want to spin it up, we'll just go with npm start. And as far as uninstalling the package, we have the command for that. And the name is uninstall. So I'll stop the Nodemon. And in the terminal, I'll type npm uninstall. And then, of course, the package name, which in my case is going to be a Bootstrap. Now, this is one of the approaches how we can do that. And there's also a nuclear approach. Now, why I'm calling this a nuclear approach, because that way we remove the whole node modules folder. And don't worry, once you run the npm install, then of course you set everything back up from the scratch, as well as you would remove this package log.json. And don't worry, I will cover the package log.json file a bit later. And the way that is going to look like, well, we can first clear the terminal. I'll install the Bootstrap from the scratch again. So I'll say Bootstrap here. And by the way, probably need to add npm I. And now again, as you can see, I have it as my dependency. And then, like I said, the nuclear approach is removing the node modules. Yep. And then removing the package log. And then just running npm install. Now, of course, in the package JSON, if I want to remove the Bootstrap, for example, in this case, I can simply remove it from my dependencies. So I just remove it in the package JSON, then clear everything. And then we go with npm and then install. And now we'll get from the scratch the node modules, since we're the ones who removed it. And also we'll get that package -log JSON. Now, why am I showing you that nuclear approach? Because if you have used Gatsby, you know that Gatsby is somewhat notorious for sometimes just being a little bit annoying, where you do need to remove the cache folder, you do need to remove the node modules as well as package log. And then once you start up everything from the scratch, then as a magic, the Gatsby app starts working. And check it out. If we take a look at the Node modules, now, yes, there's a bunch of modules that Nodemon is using, right? But there's no Bootstrap, and I can clearly see that because there's nothing under the letter of B. So we can clearly see that we removed Bootstrap from our dependencies. All right, and now let's take a look at how we can install package globally and what would be some of the use cases. And first, let's start with command. Let's jog our memory. Command was npm install and then -g and the package name. And in Mac, they might ask you for permissions. So you'll have to start with sudo and then again, same spiel. Npm install, blah, blah, blah. And first, I want to showcase that I haven't installed Nodemon globally. And the easiest way for me to showcase that is by running Nodemon and app.js. So we'll try to install Nodemon package globally. Why? Well, because then I can use Nodemon in any of my projects. At the moment, I have it as a local package. And of course, I can spin it up by running.
Hey, thanks, man. Take it easy.
Start,
Appreciate you.
Let's imagine a
Have a great
scenario
day.
where I have, I don't know, 20 Node applications.
I don't mean to be quiet. I'm just trying to focus on this.
So to make my life easier, I will install Nodemon globally, and then I won't get this error. Because at the moment you can see command not found, Nodemon. All right, so how do we do that? Well, we can install it in our terminal, or we can do it in the integrated terminal. It doesn't really matter. When it comes to global packages, you can install it from anywhere. So in my case, I'm just gonna navigate back to my terminal, just so you don't think that I'm cheating. And I'll zoom in and we'll simply run. By the way, I need to start with sudo and then npm install and -g. And of course, we're looking for Nodemon. So now, of course, I'm prompted to enter my password. And once I enter my password, of course, I'm going to install Nodemon globally. And now in any of my projects, I can simply go with command of Nodemon and then whatever is the file name. Now, to show you some of the use cases, if you worked with Gatsby, you know that they have the global Gatsby CLI tool. And that was one of the reasons why you installed something globally, is because, well, you used one of the frameworks, for example, React or Gatsby in this case. And then, of course, in order to set up the Gatsby project or React project, you needed to install this globally. Now, things have changed, though, with arrival of NPX. And I'll talk about the NPX at the end of the video. But notice, if you navigate to your React docs and if you look for create a React app, which again was something that you needed to install globally, now they suggest this NPX route, where essentially you go with NPX and then again, whatever is the command name, for example, for create React app, that would be create React app. For Strappy, the headless CMS,
how you doing, Paul?
Create Strappy app, and hopefully you get the gist, where for every resource that, of course, would be different. And with that command, you don't have to install that tool globally. For example, again, in our case, we're installing Nodemon, but normally prior to NPX, you would install this create React app globally, and then you can spin up those React projects. Now I'm going to go back to my terminal. As you can see, I was successful.
You want to hear?
So what's going to happen if I go back to my project
like it,
and if I run Nodemon and app.js, since I have installed that package globally, there it is. I spin up my app.js. And if you don't believe me, I can change it back to hello world and I have no issues.
Does that make you happy?
And there it is. Now,
of course,
I have hello world in the console. So hopefully it is clear that yes, we can install packages globally. And yes, one of the biggest use cases was working with some type of front-end library. But with an arrival of NPX, things have shifted, where now those libraries suggest using the NPX route instead. As far as my personal preference, since I'm recording a lot of courses, and since some of the global packages usually introduce some kind of bugs to the students, now, not for all the students, but there's always this one student who just has a lot of issues with the global package. Personally, I avoid them as much as possible. So I always either use the NPX or I just set it up as a local dependency. Again, it's not a rule. You can do whatever you would want, but I'm just telling you what is my preferred option. As far as what is NPX, it stands for execute, and official name is the package runner. It is a feature that was introduced in NPM 5.2. And again, the main idea is following, where you can run that CLI tool, for example, in this case, create React app, without installing these globally. So as long as you have NPM with a version of 5.2 or greater, instead of doing this whole spiel of setting up the CLI tool globally, you just go with NPX and then whatever is the tool name. And of course, the last one is the folder name. As far as the package log JSON, why do we need it? Well, if we take a look at our dependencies, we can see that they have a version.
You say hi?
And if you remember, some of the dependencies have dependencies on their own. And of course, we need to keep in mind that those dependencies have versions as well. And for example, the
You're talking
person
about all your
who gets your
dinosaurs?
project, you probably want them to have the same exact setup because keep in mind, as these versions change, well,
He's
so does some of the functionality, correct?
no.
So for example, you set up to your whole project, you use some kind of dependency that uses some other package, and that version changes, not for example for the Bootstrap, but for the jQuery. And then pretty much your project is obsolete, meaning it might get some bugs because the version of the jQuery changed. So that's why you have this package log JSON, and in there you have those specific versions for all the packages, not only for dependencies, but also for the packages that the dependency is using. Now, as far as this version, we have three values, and you can think of it as a contract between us, the people who are using the package, and the person who is creating. And the first number is a major change. So when this changes, that means that there are some breaking changes. Now, the second one is a minor one. So that means that it is backward compatible. So for example, if this changes to 18, I shouldn't expect any breaking changes. And the last one is just a patch for the bug fix. So that's also something to keep in mind when you decide to publish your own package. But of course, that's why you have here this version. Now, lastly, I would just want to mention that
I legitimately never knew that. I never knew how that versioning convention worked, but I'm glad I know that now.
if you're interested in more info about the package JSON, I would suggest this resource. So I simply went with package JSON, then keep on scrolling, and you're looking for, I guess, this blog post, right? So the name is The Basics of Package JSON. And in here, you'll literally find everything explained to the smallest detail, whether that is a name, version, and the rest of the fields that you can find in a package JSON. Beautiful. We now know how to utilize NPM, and for starters, as a result, for the remainder of the course, instead of frantically typing node app.js in a terminal, we'll simply spin up Nodemon, and it will watch for the changes and restart the app for us. Now what? Before we move on to creating servers with ExpressJS, there are a few important node topics I would like to cover first. And those topics are following: event loop, async patterns in Node.js, events emitter, and streams in Node.js. While these topics are extremely important, please keep in mind that our goal is to only understand the general ideas behind these concepts. And I only introduce them so you have an overall understanding of how things work in Node.js before we build our first Node.js app. If you're not satisfied with my explanations or simply want to do more research by yourself, just type any of these terms in your favorite search engine, and I can guarantee you'll find plenty of useful resources within a matter of seconds, like blog posts, YouTube videos, and conference talks. With that said, it's my strong opinion that it might be easier to understand those concepts more deeply. So, not just a general understanding, but understanding them more deeply once you have one or a few working Node apps under your developer's belt. Let me also mention that in order not to waste your time with time-consuming setup, in few upcoming videos, I will run some pre-built code. Let me be very clear though. I'm only going to do that in a few videos, and for the remainder of the course, we will type out everything together. All right, and let's kick things off by discussing the event loop. Now, event loop in Node.js is one of those topics where I could spend the entire course discussing it, and it still wouldn't be enough. So let's try to avoid that and instead just understand the general concepts. While there are tons of useful event loop explanations out there, the one that I probably like the most is this one. The event loop is what allows Node.js to perform non-blocking I/O, so input and output operations, despite the fact that JavaScript is single-threaded, by offloading operations to the system kernel whenever possible. And as you can see, I'm reading straight from the Node docs. Now, don't beat yourself up if this sounds like a lot of gibberish. There's a reason why one can dedicate the entire course just for event loop. It is a pretty complex topic, but one word I do want you to remember is this offloading, and you'll see why in a second. Also, don't worry, I have prepared more examples as well as some slides to get my point across. But just in case you're not happy with my examples, or you just want to explore the Node event loop in greater detail, here are a few external resources I find particularly useful. When it comes to blog posts, just go to your favorite search engine and type Node.js event loop. And the one that I find really useful is this one. And the resource is Node.js and not .org, but it is .dev. And then follow the link. And here they cover event loop in great detail with a lot of cool examples and pictures and slides and all that good stuff. And when it comes to videos, I would suggest going to YouTube and then just type event loop. And the first video that's going to pop up is going to be the event loop bot in browser JavaScript. And I'll talk about it in a second. And the Node.js specific event loop video is this one. I believe it's 15-minute long, and you can see the name over here. So this is a very, very useful video where the speaker covers a lot of useful details about Node.js loop in great detail. And the reason why I'm suggesting the first one as well, what is the language that we use in Node? That, of course, is JavaScript, right? And even though there's some differences between the event loop, the one that we use in a browser, and the one that is in the Node.js, if you understand the concepts behind the event loop that we use in a browser, trust me, you're already halfway there to understanding how the Node.js event loop works. Since it's such an important topic, like promised, I have prepared some of my own resources as well. We'll start with the slides and move on to the code examples in the next video. As a side note, I made all the course slides available on courseapi.com. Again, that website name is course-api.com. And once you click on the slides link, you'll see all the slides. And I would want to start our discussion by taking a look at what it means that JavaScript is synchronous and single-threaded. And effectively, it's just a fancy way of saying that JavaScript reads everything line by line. So for example, if I have console log with first task, then I have a for loop that takes some time, in this case 2 seconds, but that could be 10 seconds, that could be 20 or whatever. And then I have another console log of next task. JavaScript will just start reading everything, and it will read it line by line. And if this takes a long time, it will only run the next task once it's done performing this time-consuming one. So hopefully that is clear, that JavaScript just reads everything line by line. And now let's take a look at our second slide. And in here, we can see the solution if we would want to offload something to the browser. So when we're building browser JavaScript apps, we have this option of offloading to the browser. Now, of course, it doesn't mean that we can offload the for loop. That's not going to work. This effectively is still going to be the blocking code, but browser nicely provides the API where we can offload those tasks to the browser. And only when the task is done, then we execute the callback. And probably the example you have done the most is the fetch, essentially when we make the network request, but we can also do that, for example, with a set timeout. So I still have console log with first task, but then even though my set timeout function has the second argument of 0, so essentially I have set timeout function, I provide the callback function that's going to be executed in a certain amount of time. Even if this is 0, meaning you would expect this one to run right away, it only runs after the next task. So once JavaScript is done executing the immediate code, only then it executes the callback. So in this case, we have the set timeout, the API that is provided from the browser, and we just say that we would want to execute that in 0 seconds. So effectively, there is no wait time. However, JavaScript will first execute this code, and only then will execute the callback. So that way, we can offload those time-consuming operations to the browser. Again, it doesn't mean that we can offload for loops. It means that browser does provide some APIs where we don't have to write the blocking code. Now, let me be very clear though. When I say we cannot offload for loops, what I mean is that we can still write blocking code in JavaScript. But the browser does provide some nice APIs where we can offload those time-consuming tasks. And that brings us to our main friend, the Node.js event loop. Again, before I go over the example, let me stress something. Event loop is somewhat complex, and this is just to give you a general understanding. So let's imagine this scenario. I have an app, and just like any cool app, I have subscribers or users or however you would want to call them. And in this case, since my app is so popular, I have 8 of them. And what do the users do? Well, they're probably being annoying and they're requesting something from the application. And as the requests are coming in, the event loop is responsible for avoiding this type of scenario. So let's imagine this. I have all these users, the requests are coming in, but Larry the Little decides that in his request, there's going to be some kind of time-consuming, database crawl or something like that. So effectively, he's requesting something, and behind the scenes in my code, that means that I need to perform something that takes a long time. So in this case, the event loop just registers the callback. So it registers what needs to be done when the task is complete. Because if the event loop wouldn't do that, then we would have this scenario where the requests are coming in. And because Larry is requesting something that takes a long time, the rest of the users would have to wait. And essentially, it's not that the actual operation takes a long time. It's just the fact that we're wasting our time on waiting for that operation to be done. And only then we can serve the other users. But what the event loop does, it registers the callback. And only when the operation is complete, it executes it. Now, keep in mind that, again, we're not executing this right away when we can. Effectively, it's the same scenario where we run our immediate code first. And only then, when we have the time, we execute the callback. So, for example, in this scenario, if I would have 100 console logs after the next task, I would run them first. And only then the second task would appear here, regardless of what is the time set in here. Because again, we're running our immediate tasks first, and only then we run the callbacks. So the same thing happens here, where the requests are coming in. Let's say that the operation is complete. We first registered the callback, operation is complete, and instead of executing that callback right away, it effectively gets put at the end of the line. And then when there is no immediate code to run, then we execute the callback. Hopefully that is clear. Event loop is our best friend because with the help of event loop, we can offload some time consuming operations and effectively just keep all our users happy. All right. And once we have looked at the event loop in theory, to hammer this home, let's also take a look at some code examples where we can see event loop in action. As a side note, all code examples are located in the event loop example directory. So if you need to take a look, just grab the repo and you can find it there. And you should be familiar with our first example, since it's a async version of read file method. So we import read file from the fs module, and then we have console log started our task first. Then we have read file method where we pass the path, we pass the encoding, and then of course we have the callback. And then in the callback, I console log the first result, and then of course I have completed the first task. And then right after the read file, I have starting next task. And something really interesting. In a console, I can see that we first console log started the first task. Then I right away have starting the next task. And then, of course, once I'm done, once I get back my result, then, of course, I have hello, this is first text file, and, of course, completed first task. And again, the reason why is this happening, because read file is asynchronous. And we already know that event loop will offload this, in this case, to a file system. So we start reading the file. Notice like, okay, run this line of code, then offload this one. And only when I get back to the result, then run the callback. So when the file system responds with error or the data, then we invoke this one. All right. So we offload this task and we just keep on reading the code. That's why we have started the first task, starting the next one. So right away, go to the next task. And this one, this asynchronous one, well, we're just offloading. And then once the response comes back, whether it's an error, whether it's a success, only then we invoke the callback. Hopefully that is clear. Now, as far as this comment, I only added this one because we need to keep in mind that, of course, I'm just grabbing this code from the file, but the file is sitting in the folder. So if you were to run Nodemon and then directly the file name, which is, of course, going to be in the event loop, the path won't match. So this path only matches because, of course, I have app.js. But if you'll try to run this code directly in this file, that's why it's not going to match, and you would need to go one level up. Now, my assumption is that you're running it the same as me, and you're running that with npm start. That's why I kept the path matching to the one in the app.js. Now, our next example, so let me clear my app.js. I can close the read file as well as Package Json. And then the next one is set timeout. So select here everything and
you can start creating back-end and fundamentals of this 8-hour course will teach you the fundamentals of Node.js and Express.
What'd I do? I fucked my shit up now? Where's my video? Not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for this. This.
project with other developers. Awesome. We have Package Json. We installed a few dependencies. And now I want to cover why having Package Json is so crucial appropriately. Hopefully it is clear. And of course, we can move on to our next topic. All right. And up next, I would want to talk about asynchronous patterns in Node.js. So if we remember, when we were setting up the file system module, we covered how we have two flavors. We have the synchronous one and the asynchronous one. And while asynchronous one is great, since we're not blocking the event loop, the problem is that if we're using this callback approach, well, it gets messy pretty quickly, right? Because we're nesting one callback inside of the other one. So now in the following videos, I would want to show you the alternative that we'll use throughout the course and why, in my opinion, it is a much cleaner syntax. And that's why, of course, we'll use it. And first, what I would want is just to kill everything here. And I'll start with the Nodemon since I'm done showing you the event loop. And we're just going to go with npm start, right? That was the proper one. And now I'll delete everything that I currently have not yet. Sorry. So I'll leave this one, the async one. I would want to remove everything in the app.js. And now I just want to quickly show you the code that would block that event loop. Again, this is going to be the video where if you don't want to code along, you don't have to. You can just sit back and relax, and effectively you'll be in good shape. And again, we'll set up the server, like I mentioned before already 20,000 times. Don't worry about specific commands. We have the rest of the course where we'll be building servers. So trust me, you'll get sick of it. So we'll go with HTTP and require. And of course, we're looking for HTTP module. And then remember the methods create server and listen. So we go with const and we create the server that is HTTP and create server. We pass in callback. The callback takes two objects, request object and response object. So again, essentially request object is what is coming in and response object just represents what we're sending out, what essentially we are responding. And then I would want to listen on a port again. So I run server.listen and then I'll pass in the port of 5000. And then of course we have that callback once the server is ready. And in here we can just go with console log and we'll simply say server is listening on port 5000. Server is listening or just listening is fine. Listening on port and then of course in my case port is 5000. Let's set that up. So we should have this listening on port 5000. And then of course in my callback function, I would want to check for the URLs because I would want to show you how even if we try to get a different resource, we're still blocked by other user if he or she is requesting some kind of resource where we have the blocking code. And don't worry, if this sounds like gibberish, you'll see what I mean in a second. So remember on the request object, we could check for the URL. So effectively you could check what is the resource that the user is requesting. So for example, homepage would be / and then the about page would be / and about. And that is sitting in the property by the name of request and URL. So request is the object and then URL is the property. So again, we'll do a quick and dirty way. We'll just say request URL is equal to a / That means it's a homepage. And then we just need to go with res.end. And then we'll say homepage. Again, later we'll have way more sophisticated approach, but for now, this will do. And then we're checking for the about page. Okay, awesome. So this is going to be an about page. And then if there's a page that doesn't match any of the resources, then of course I'll just send back, I don't know, error page. I'm not going to set up the whole link, nothing like that. All right, we save it. And then this should send back about page. Awesome. And then of course in homepage, I can just respond with the homepage. So life is beautiful. Users can come here. And as a side note, multiple users I'm representing with these tabs. So imagine these are my users and life is beautiful. We are requesting resources and we're just going on about our day. Now, the problem is going to be if I go to about and if I set up some kind of blocking code. Now, what would be a blocking code? Well, that could be a nested for loop. So I'm just going to go with blocking code and then I'll add some exclamation points. And let's simply set up a for loop. Let's say I is equal to 0. And then let's say I is less than 1000. And yep, I plus plus. So every iteration will increase by 1. However, I'll set it up as a nested for loop. So copy and paste, and I'll just change these values to J. So J here and J here. And then let's just console log and we'll say J and I. Again, doesn't really matter what we type there. Just say I and J. Now, $1 question. What do you think is going to happen? So if the user navigates to about, I mean, we can kind of see that this will take some time. right? Now, you would expect, though, that only the user who navigates here gets blocked. And you'd be wrong because we'll also block the other suckers who are just trying to get to the homepage. So let me navigate here and check this out. So I run this one and notice how we're loading. Now, the same thing happens here now and here. Okay. And only when we're done here, then these two can get their resource again. Now, of course, if I go to my project, I can see that in the console, I have all these values, right? Because I have this blocking code. I have the synchronous code that just takes a long time. And this is just a representation of why we prefer this asynchronous. Now, yes, at the moment this is messy, and don't worry, in next videos we'll fix it. But this hopefully gives you an idea why you should always strive setting up your code asynchronously. Because what we've learned in the previous videos, if we do that, then those tasks are offloaded. And then only when the data is back, only when it's ready, then we invoke it. And that way we're not blocking the other users. Hopefully it is clear. And now, of course, let's take a look at some other patterns we can use. So we still get the benefits. So we're not blocking that event loop, but we also have a cleaner code where we don't have this nested callback mess. All right. And once we have covered why it's so important to use the asynchronous approach, now, of course, let's clean up our FAA sync. So instead of using these nested callbacks, let's see a nicer pattern. And as a side note, if you want to see the code that we wrote in a previous video and the one we're about to write, then the files are located into async patterns folder. So I'll close everything for now. And then back in app.js, I can remove it. Like I said, if you want to access that code, it is sitting in the to async patterns folder. And we'll simply start by recreating the read file setup, where I'm going to go with const, and I'm right away accessing that from the file system module, and I'll set it equal to require, of course, and then file system. All right, well, that's awesome. We know that it is asynchronous, so we need to set it up with 3 parameters. We go with read file, and then we would want to pass in path first. So again, since I'm in app.js, I'm going to be looking for the content, and then /, and then first txt. The file we already created before, then we have encoding, so comma, and then again, we're going to go with UTF-8, and then last one is going to be that callback, where the first value is the error, and then the second one is the data that we're getting back. Okay, awesome. So once the file system responds, then of course we invoke this callback, and inside of that callback, we have our logic. So if there's going to be an error, for the time being, I will just return like so, and then if I have the data, I'll set it up as else. So I'll say here console log and data, of course. And we shouldn't be surprised if we see in a console, hello, this is a first text file, because we already covered the setup, right? So we pass in the path, we pass in the encoding, and then we set up the callback. Now the problem starts if we would want to perform multiple actions. If I want to read 2 files and then, for example, write one, correct? So what would be a better solution? Well, a better solution would be turning this into a promise. And then eventually we'll set up a sync await. Now, please keep in mind that the only reason why we'll type out the promise stuff is because I would want you to understand what is happening behind the scenes. But don't worry, throughout the course, we'll just stick with a sync and await syntax. And essentially, you won't have to worry about what is happening behind the scenes. But the first example, yes, I want you to understand everything in detail. So what we could do is create a new function, and we can just say const, and then I'll call this getText. Now, this getText will take a path, since I would want to read 2 files, and then eventually write one as well, just like we did here. And of course, the goal here is to showcase how we can make the code in the file fsasync, at least that's how I called my file, much cleaner and more readable. So again, we pass in the path, and then what I would want to return from this function is a promise. So we go with return new promise, and then in the promise object, what we need to pass in is another callback function. So we pass in the callback function, and in here we pass in 2 more functions. One for resolve, and then one for reject. And then once I have set up both of these parameters, now, of course, what I would want is to move the read file and place it inside of the promise one. Okay. So once we place it here, first of all, notice here how I'm passing in the path. So of course I can change this one around. So I can say path, and then the encoding stays the same as well as the callback. However, inside of the callback, once I have access to resolve and reject, what I could simply say that if there's an error, I will spit back the error. So I'll say reject an error. And if everything goes great, now, of course, let's go with a resolve, and then we'll pass in the data. And once we have this set up, what's really cool that now I can invoke get text, and this is going to return a promise. And then of course we can chain dot then and catch. So below the get text, I can go with get text. And of course we're looking for the path. So we still would need to use dot and then forward slash and then content, of course, and first txt. So that's the path. And then, like I said, we are returning a promise. So we can chain dot then. And of course, here I can have the result. And I'll just console log it for now, or result. And then I can also chain dot catch. And here I'm passing in the error. So again, we console log it, and we simply would want to see the error. I save it, and beautiful. Again, in the console, I have, hello, this is first text file. So I know that it worked. And also, if I change the path, so if I make my path incorrect, we should see in the console the error, where of course Node cannot find the file. So if that works, now of course we can take a look at how we can make it even cleaner by setting up async await. And once we have our initial setup, once we have turned this into a promise, technically we're not out of the woods. Because if I would want to perform again 2 file reads and then eventually write the file as well, and if I would want to do all of that asynchronously, it's still going to be pain just by using the promises. So what would be a solution? Well, since we're returning a promise, if I use async await, I can wait till promise is settled and then decide what I would want to do. And the way we set that one up is by creating a new function. Now, please keep one thing in mind, where eventually throughout the course, those functions that I'm about to set up are going to be provided to us. So we'll just attach that async to the callback functions that are already provided us by the libraries, okay? But in this example, I'll have to create one from the scratch. And again, the whole point is because I would want to create a function, a start function, that I'm going to set it up as a synchronous function, and I would want to attach a wait. So I would only respond once the promise is settled. So in here I go const start, and that's my function, but I need to set it up right away as async because I would want to use my await keyword, correct? And then we simply go with const, and I know that, of course, I'm looking for the first file, and I'll just say first, and that one is equal to get text, and basically I want to pass in the same thing here. Now I do need to place this one in quotation marks, so my bad, I messed it up a little bit. Okay, I passed it in, and that should do it. Now, of course, what I'm missing here is await, so I had this await, and now only once the promise is resolved, then I'll get my response. So what I could do here is just comment these two, or you know what, this one I cannot comment out yet. Don't worry, we will eventually. This one I can comment out and then maybe move this below. Okay, so you don't think that I'm running this code. And since I have my function now, of course, I would need to invoke it. So invoke start and check it out. Now, of course, I don't have the error, which is a good sign, I guess. And then we'll simply go with log and then first. And notice the difference. Where previously, when we were setting up the callbacks, we had to nest everything. Now I'm waiting for this promise to be resolved. And only once it's resolved, then of course I can do something with the value. Now, every time we have this async await approach, what we would want is to wrap this in the try catch block. So if something goes wrong, then we have at least a little bit of control over it. So I'll set up try catch block, and then I'll set up my first await, and eventually we'll add here more. And then in the error, I'll simply go with console log, and we'll console log the error. And let's just save that one. So now we have nice try and catch block. And by the way, sorry, I deleted it. We'll still take a look at the first one. And then if we change the path, then of course we'll get an error. Okay, so that's good. Now I have my start function. It is asynchronous. I'm waiting for the promises to resolve. They're all wrapped in try catch block. So what's next? Well, if you remember in here, what were the actions that we were doing? Well, we read 2 files, correct? And then we wrote one. Okay, so let's try that one with this new approach, where essentially I have first, so I'll just copy and paste, and then I'll look for the second file. Remember, we should have that in the content. So this is going to be the second one, second over here, and then I would want to write the file. Now, of course, you could say, well, the problem here is going to be that I'll have to write a new wrapping function to set it up as a promise. Because yes, we can, of course, read the file, but functionality for the write file, again, we would need to wrap it. Don't worry, there's a way how we can get this actually out of the node. First, I would just want to showcase how much cleaner this already is, where I can just wait for first, second, like so. And now notice in the console, hello, this is the first text, and hello, this is the second file. Again, I fully understand that you're looking at this wrapper function and you're like, well, this definitely doesn't look that much cleaner than this one. Don't worry, there's a way for us to get those functions in a way that they're already returning a promise. What I would want you to focus on is this code. What I would want you to understand that this definitely is much cleaner than what we have here. We read a file and then we set up another nested callback and another nested callback, and hopefully you get the gist. Waiting for these promises to resolve is definitely a cleaner and more readable approach. All right, so this works. We have our start function. It is asynchronous. We're waiting for the promises to resolve, and we can see that it is already much cleaner. How we can set up this code without the wrapping function? Well, what's really cool that in Node, there is a module by the name of util. And we'll just go here, const, and we'll assign it to a variable. And we'll just be looking for require, of course, since we would want to import the module. And again, the name is util. And then inside of this module, we have a method by the name of promisify. And with the use of this function, we can take our read file, which of course was looking for the callback, and turn it into the function that returns a promise. And again, this is oversimplified version of what is happening there, but hopefully you understand that as a result, we'll get again this promise back. Now, the way we'll set that up, of course, we have a read file here already, so I cannot use the same name. That's why I'll go with read file, and we'll call this promise. And that one is equal to util. That is, of course, my module dot, and then notice the function promisify, and then we pass in that read file function. So now I have my promise one. So now what I could do is, first of all, comment this out and move it down. Again, so it stays for your reference, but it doesn't compromise my view. And of course, now I'll have the error because, well, get text is not defined. That's fine, don't worry. And I'll copy and paste. And since I also would want to write a new file, I will get from the file system one the write file function, and then I'll do the same thing, where in this case it's going to be called write file promise, and then we pass in write file. And of course, now instead of calling get text, what I'm going to do is go with write file, or I'm sorry, in this case we're going for read file promise, and then keep in mind one thing where this is not a get text one, so we're still looking for the path as well as the encoding. That's why I'll copy and paste. And then the second argument we pass in is the encoding. And again, our functionality shouldn't change, where I should see in the console the results from the first txt. Now, of course, I would want to do the same thing with the second one. So have read file promise, second txt. Again, we have to pass in the encoding, otherwise we'll get the buffer back. So copy this and paste. And again, if we console log it, there it is. We have, hello, this is first text file, and this is the second one. And since in the line 4, we passed in write file into promisify. Of course, what we could also do is right away write the file. So I can go with await, and I'm simply not assigning this to a variable because, well, I'm getting back undefined there as far as data. And I'm just going to go with await, write file promise, and the same spiel. We pass in first the path. And in this case, of course, if the file is not there, Node will create one. And the name will be result. And I'll just call this mine grenade and then txt, and then the second one is data. So for that one, I'll set up my template string, and I'll just say this is awesome, and then let's set up the colon, and then we'll access both first as well as the second one. So we'll interpolate both of them, second, and then once we save, if we take a look at the content, there it is. Now we have the mine grenade one, correct? Now there's probably one where I was testing. Yep, there's one where I was testing, so I'll remove this one. But if I take a look at the txt one, then of course I'll have, this is awesome, hello, this is first text file, and then I have the second one. Now, what's even more cool, that technically we can even skip this part as well. Again, I'll leave this one for your reference, but if you go to require, and then you require, of course, file system module, but if you add dot promises, what do you think is going to return? Well, effectively the same thing. So now, of course, I just need to change the name from read file promise and write file promise back to read file and write file, since those are the two functions that I'm importing, and that will right away return promises. And again, we save, and remember that by default, we're just overriding stuff. So if I were to go and add a third argument, my options one, and if I'm just going to say flag and.
So that whole fucking half hour of him explaining that shit to me and doing it long form, and then saying you don't have to do it long form because we have this other method we can bring in called promisify to do it this way. But you don't even need to do it that way because you can just do dot promise on the end of your FS file system. I don't even know why he included it there in the first place. He should have just said, left all of that shit out and then gone straight to fucking the dot promise. Because now it's just fucking confusing because you added all this other shit in there that was not actually fucking necessary because it was a third party thing in the first place.
I'll set it equal to append. Once we save, well, now we have this is awesome. Repeat it one more time. Again, just to showcase that our functionality still works. I fully understand that there was a little detour where we created our own wrapper function and then we covered how we would consume promises. But hopefully, this helps you understand that this approach is definitely way better. So it is more readable, it is more easier to wrap your head around. And that's why for the remainder of the course, we'll stick with this one. Again, some things will be provided to us by default. So libraries will provide the functions that return promises. Will right away have the callback functions that we'll just set up as async, and hopefully you get the gist. So a lot of things will be given to us, but the core functionality won't change, where instead of using callbacks and nesting them inside of the other callbacks and nesting more and more and more, we'll set up everything with async await because the syntax is cleaner and way easier to read. Excellent. Once we have covered async patterns we're going to use throughout the course, now let's talk about events in Node.js. When working on browser JavaScript apps, a big part of our work is to handle events. For example, user clicks a button, and of course, in our program, we handle that. User hovers over the link, and again, same deal. In our program, we are handling that. And hopefully you get the gist. Essentially, as our program executes, at least in part, it is controlled by events. Of course, depending on a program, but it's safe to say that in browser app, those events are mostly external. Now, that style of programming is actually called event-driven programming. And effectively, it's just that, a style in which the flow of the program is at least in part determined by the events that occur as the program executes. Now, it's easier to imagine that, of course, when you have a GUI, right? The graphical interface, just like the button and links example I just mentioned. But what about server side? Is it also possible? And of course, the answer is yes. In fact, event-driven programming is used heavily in Node.js. And in the following videos, we'll see some of the examples of it. And basically, the idea is following. We listen for specific events and register functions that will execute in response to those events. So once our event takes place, callback function fires, just like in our imaginary button example. Now, before we continue, let me stress something. Our first examples are going to be basic and even somewhat silly, but don't let that fool you. Many built-in modules in Node.js do use events under the hood, and therefore making events and event-driven programming a big part of Node.js. All right, and once we have covered general concepts behind events as well as event-driven programming, now let's set up our own events in Node. And the way we do that, we come up with a variable, and typically this name is event emitter because what we're getting back is the class, and we require the events module. So we require events module, and we assign it to a variable, which essentially is a class. And again, a common practice is calling this event emitter. And at this point, you have two options. If you want to create something custom, you'll need to extend the class, or if you simply want to emit an event as well as listen for it, then you can just create the instance. So we'll go with the second route. We'll go with const and then whatever name you would want. In my case, I'm just going to call this custom emitter, like so. And I'll assign it to new emitter, so event emitter, or however you call this variable. And we just need to invoke it. So now we have the instance of our class. So essentially, we have the object. Now, there are many methods in this object. However, two that we're interested in most are on and emit. So on will listen for specific event, and then emit, of course, will emit that event. And the way we set it up, we go with custom emitter or whatever name you used, and then we go with on. And at the very basic setup in the on method, we just pass in a string where we say the name of the event. Now, in my case, I'll name my one response. And then, of course, once I have subscribed to it, I also would want to pass in the callback function. So essentially, when this event takes place, well, then I would want to do something. And in my case, I'll just go with console log, and we'll simply say date received. However, I'll place this one in the template strings, and you'll see in a second why. So we'll go with data received, and then eventually there's going to be some more data. And of course, once we have subscribed to this specific event, now I would want to emit it. And the way we do that, we just go with custom emitter. And then of course, the method is, surprise, surprise, emit. And of course, at this point, these strings need to match. So if I'm emitting the response event, I just say here response. And what you'll see in the console is wherever you have in a callback. So of course, in my case, I have console log data received. And then once I run it, I have data received in a console. So that's the most basic setup when it comes to events. Again, we create an instance from the class that we get back from the events module. And then we have two methods. We have on method as well as the emit method. And then in the on method, we pass in a string. So that's going to be the name of the event as well as the callback function. So once this event takes place, then of course we would want to do something. And in our case, we'll just console log data received. And then once we have subscribed to this event, then of course we need to emit it. And the way we do that, we just go with whatever the name is, in my case, custom emitter, then emit method, and then we pass in the same string that we're listening for. In our case, of course, response. And then the moment we do that, we of course have whatever is in the callback function, which in our case, of course, is just a simple log data received. All right. And once we have covered the basic setup, now let me show you some things that I would want you to be aware of. First, we can have as many methods we would want. So for example, we have the same event. We have here response, correct? And we are omitting it. So nothing stops me here. Just copy and paste and listen for the same event, which of course in our case is this response, and then do some other logic in my callback. Again, in my case, it's just going to be simple, different console log. So I'm going to say some other logic here. And I'm not going to copy and paste the same function 20,000 times just to prove my point, but hopefully understand that yes, we can emit our event. And then yes, also we can have as many functions we would want here that are listening for that event and do some other logic. So that's point number one. Point number two that I would like to make is the fact that this order matters. So we first listen for event and then we emit it. So for example, if I will place my emit above the second function or above both of the functions, what you'll notice that I have nothing in a console. Why? Well, because I first emit the event and only then I listen for it. As you can see, that doesn't make sense. So first we would want to listen for the event and only then we would emit it. So in this case, notice I don't have this some other logic goes in here because I listen for response and then I right away emit the response. And then again, I listen for the response, but I already emitted the event, correct? So it doesn't make sense to listen for the event once it has been already emitted. So that's the point number two. And then thirdly, I would also want to showcase that we can pass the arguments when we're emitting the event. So for example, I go here with my emit, I pass in the name, which is of course response, and then I can pass in more arguments. For example, here I'll go John and then the ID number 34. So string and a number. And then in my callback function, I can access those arguments as parameters, just like normal functions. So in this case, I'll call them name and ID. And simply in my console log, I'll say name. And the second one will be with ID. And then whatever is that ID. Now I'll add here data received user and then save it. And it's no surprise that in a console, I see data received user John with ID 34. Now in the second function, as you can see, I wasn't looking for those arguments. I just don't have access to the arguments because I don't have the parameters. But it's not like everything broke just because in the event I passed in the arguments. And lastly, I would just want to reiterate the point that even though you might not write your own events, events are a core building block of Node. And effectively, as you're building and writing out the code for your Node application, you are using those events at the end of the day anyway, because a lot of built-in modules rely on them. And as a quick side note, if you'd like to see the code that we wrote in previous two lectures, you can just navigate to 13 event emitter. And in order to show you that, I'll quickly set up a server. And again, the code for this one you can find at 14 and then request event. So I'll copy all the contents from the file and then just copy and paste. And notice something interesting, where again, yes, we're getting the HTTP module. And remember the setup that we have used so far, where we go with HTTP, create server, and then we pass in this callback function. And then, of course, this callback function will be invoked every time someone visits our server. So every time the request comes in. Now, there's another way how we can set it up by using Event Emitter API. So we still create a server. We go with HTTP and then create server function. But instead of passing in the callback function, like we did previously, server has the method on. Does that ring a bell? Remember our previous example? We had our own instance and it had the method of on, correct? So the same goes for server. So server has the method on and we listen for request event. And when that request comes in, then of course, again, we have this callback function that handles it. So behind the scenes, server emits the request event. And then of course, we can listen for it. We can subscribe to it, listen for it, or respond to it, however you'd want to call it. And the way we do that, we go with server on, and then this is a specific name because of course it emits that specific name behind the scenes. So make sure that it is a request and then the same spiel. Now, how do I know that? Well, if we go to Node documentation and if we look for HTTP, we keep on scrolling, eventually we'll hit the server. And over here, I can see that it has a class. Okay, that's a good start. And then what do you see here? Well, I see the event, right? And what is the event? Well, the name is request. So that's how I know that my server, the instance that I create, has the ability to listen for request events. And if you want to dig deeper, you can just click on a server. You notice that it extends the net server. And if we keep on digging, check it out. So this one extends what? It extends the event emitter. So hopefully that makes it clear that even though you might not be setting up events on your own, a bunch of built-in modules rely heavily on this concept of events. All right. And up next, we have streams in Node.js. And at its simplest, streams are used to read or write sequentially. Basically, when we have to handle and manipulate streaming data, for example, continuous source or a big file, streams come in real handy. In Node, there are 4 different types of streams. We have writable, used to write data sequentially. Then we have readable, used to read data sequentially. Duplex, used to both read and write data sequentially. And also transform, where data can be modified when writing or reading. Just like with events, many built-in modules in Node implement streaming interface. And what's also interesting, streams extend event emitters class, which simply means that we can use events like data and on streams. Since streams are somewhat of an advanced topic in Node, I'll try to keep it short and sweet, mostly by showing you examples of streams, and hopefully that way you get the main idea without being overwhelmed. All right, and once we know the theory behind the stream,
Jesus. Been going at like this guy talking at me nonstop for over 2 hours. Where are we at here with our thing? What are we at? We're at 3.5 hours into this shit. Let me see here. We have streams. How much more do we have? All right, so it looks like we have oof. 3.5 hours in, and we have, it looks like, another 40 minutes before we start actually getting into practical application and hands-on shit. And then we have 5 hours of practical application, building applications. Okay.
streams. Now let's take a look at the practical example. And a very good use case is using streams when we are reading files, because we need to understand one thing, where when we use the sync or asynchronous approach, what happens, we're reading the whole file. And of course, in our example, we were setting this equal to a variable, correct? But if we have a big file, well, first of all, you're just using all that memory. And second, as the file size gets bigger and bigger and bigger, eventually the variable is not going to be good enough. You will get an error that, I mean, the size is too big and you cannot place everything in the string. So what would be a solution? Well, solution would be read stream option. And the way we'll set this up, I'm going to start app.js from the scratch. But if you take a look at the repo, you'll notice this 15, create big file. So previously, when we were working with files, I just had some small files, right? So I had the first txt, blah, 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 result, and whatever. Now, before we set up the read stream, I would want to create a big file. Again, this is optional. You don't have to do that. But in my case, in order to show you how the streams work, yes, I'll have to set up a big file. And first I'll remove it because of course I already have it since I was testing it. And now I'll stop my server. And of course, in my case, I'll run 15, the create big file JS. If you want to set it on your own, and if you don't want to use the repo, you can just get the right file sync from the FS module. And then notice I have the loop where I believe I have here 10,000. And then every iteration, I just write a big txt. Of course, I have the flag append, and then I'm just adding hello world and starting a new line. So if I'll run node, and then of course I'm going to go with my file name, which is 15, then hyphen create big file and JS, like so. Then in the content, I should have this big file. And once I have my big file, I'll go back to app.js and I'll use my npm start, since of course I have Nodemon in place. And then let's go with const. Now, I'm not going to show you how the setup would look like with file sync or the asynchronous one. Again, hopefully you understand that the setup would be exactly the same like we have in 10 and 11, where we had the FA sync and FA async. And now, of course, let's just go with the stream option. So the method name is create read stream, and we require that from the FS module, like so. And then we create a new variable, and in my case, I'll call this stream, and we invoke the create read stream. And the only thing by default we need to pass in is the path. So of course, in my case, I'm going to go with content and then /. And since I just created that text file, the big one, of course, I'm going to go with big txt. And now remember the good old friends events. Well, once we create this instance, we actually have access to them. And the ones that we're going to use is going to be data and error. So we can go with stream and then on. Again, remember the event syntax. And then the event that you would want to listen for is a data. And then we have our callback function. And again, it is a parameter, so we can call it whatever we want. But in my case, I'm going to go with result. And let's just console log the result, like so. And what you'll notice is that we have 64 kilobytes here. That's our first console log. Then we have another one for 64 kilobytes. And the reason why I know that is because by default, that's the size we're getting. And then we're getting the reminder. Now, just to prove my point, I'm going to go to my folder and I'm going to look for my content. And then in there, if you take a look, the big text file we created is 169 kilobytes. So as you can see, now we're reading data in chunks. And by default, that chunk is 64 kilobytes. And every time we console log, we see that we have 64, 64, and eventually we have the remainder. So instead of reading everything and placing that in a variable, we're doing that in chunks. And as you can see, we're using the event, and the event is data. And in order to hammer this home, why don't we take a look at the docs? So first, I'm going to look for my file system, and then let's look for our create read stream. So we go here, as we can see, we have this class, read stream. And then on this class, we have these three ones. We have close, open, and ready. And as a side note, we'll use this one a little bit later as well, the open one. So keep an eye on this one. And then as far as the read stream, well, as you can see, it is created when we go with create read stream and invoke it, right? So I got the create read stream. That's my function. I just passed in the path and I invoked it. And in turn, that returns the read stream, right? Then actual read stream extends from stream.readable. So right away, I have these events. I have close, open, and ready. And like I said, we'll use this open a little bit later. Now, since it is extending from the stream, check it out. Now, of course, I have the data one, right? So this is a chunk of data. And as you can see, every time we are getting that data, we can do something with it. Now, at the moment, we're just console logging. It's very simple. But eventually, as you can already imagine, we can do way more useful things than that. Beautiful. Once we understand the basics, now let's take a look at some additional info. Like I said, by default, the size of the buffer is going to be 64 kilobytes. However, we can also control it. And the way we do that is by passing in the object when we're setting up create read stream. So first argument is going to be the path, which again, in my case, is going to be that big text file that I created using my file, using my for loop. And then I can pass in the options object. And in there, the property that you're looking for, the property that controls the size of the buffer, has the name of high watermark. So for example, if I go with 90,000 here, then of course you'll see that I'll have two console logs, one for 90 kilobytes, and the second one will be remainder. Again, keep in mind that our file size is 169 kilobytes. That's number one. Number two, we can right away set up the encoding as well. So I go with comma, and then the property name is encoding. And again, we'll set it up equal to UTF-8, like so. And then you'll see in the console, of course, the hello worlds. Why? Well, because that is the content coming from the file. And lastly, I also would want to mention that we have the error event as well. So if I go with stream and then on, and we're checking for the error, and as always, we can do something once that error happens. So that's our callback function. And in this case, I'll just access the error property and I'll console log the error. So I'll say here error. And the way we check that one out is by providing a wrong path. So in my case, I'm just going to add 2 dots. And then once I save, check it out. In the console, I'll have the error where it tells me that no such file or directory. All right. And now let's take a look at the practical example when streams come in handy. Now, again, this is going to be one of those videos where you don't have to code along. You can just sit back and relax and see how I struggle. And first, what I would want is to make it even a bigger file. So remember the 15, create big file. I believe I had 10 iterations, right? So I'm going to add one more, meaning I'll add one more 0. I'll stop my server right now. Again, this is optional. You don't have to do that. And I'll remove the big file like so. And then I'll run one more time the file with node. And then, of course, this file is going to be way bigger. So let me navigate to my folder just to showcase that. And I'm looking for content. And now the big file is 1.8 megs. Now, once I have the big file, I'll go with npm start. At the moment, I just have the stream example. But if you want to see the whole code, just take a look at the file number 17. And notice again, we're creating a HTTP server, and I'm just using the read file sync method. I'm looking for big txt. The encoding is UTF-8. And then I just place my variable, my text one, into res.end method. And effectively, I'm just sending my big text file. And let me restart the server here. So let me go with npm start right now. So let me select everything from this file and copy and paste. And now if we navigate to localhost 5000, we should see a bunch of hello worlds. Now, the problem with this setup is following, where if I go to developer tools and if I take a look at the network and if I refresh, yep, this request was successful. Take a look at the size. Do you think it is the smartest thing to send these type of files over the wire? And of course, this is just going to make it very difficult to all your users because you're just sending large chunks of data. Effectively, I'm sending the whole file. And more specifically, if I click, check it out. So I have the request URL. Okay, that is good. The method is get. Now, as you can see, the content length is my 1.8 megs, right? And you'll see in a second that once we refactor this to read stream method, that we're sending data in the chunks. And again, the best way to see that is by looking at the headers, where at the moment I can see the content length, and that one is at 1.8 megs. But once we refactor that, the setup is going to be different. So at the moment, I have this text. I'm accessing that by read file sync. So I'll comment this out and let's set it up with our create read stream. So I'll go with const and I'll call this file stream. And this is going to be equal to fs and then create read stream. Now I'll use the same address. So I'll use the same path and then I'll use the same encoding as well. So let's go with UTF-8. Okay, awesome. And once we set up the stream, remember we have access to 2 events, file stream on. And of course, I'm going to be looking for the open and I'll have my callback function and we'll set that functionality up in a second. And the second one, of course, is the error. So I'll go with file stream and then on. And again, we're looking for the event by the name of error. And then in our callback function, we can access the error and I'll simply pass it in my response. So if there is an error, I'll just grab the error from my parameter and pass it in. Now, as far as the open here, instead of setting it equal to, instead of going res.end and then text, file stream also have the pipe method. So we can go with file stream and then pipe. And what the pipe is doing, it is pushing from the read stream into write stream. So you can imagine that if we can read data in chunks, we can also write data in chunks. And what happens under the hood, a response object can be set up as a writable stream. So we have our file stream. So that's our read stream. We have a method of pipe. So we're piping this into a writable stream. And now, of course, I'll pass in my response object. And if we go back to the browser and if we'll refresh, now notice something interesting. Yeah, still same request, right? To localhost 5000, still same size. But if I take a look at the headers, now I can see that my response headers are chunked. So instead of sending our file back in one large instance, we're sending it back in chunks. Awesome. Congrats on completing section number 3, Node fundamentals. And hopefully after watching the section, you have a good general understanding of how Node works. And now that we're big shots, let's apply that knowledge and build some servers, shall we? And we're going to start section 4 with the general info of how the web works.
Okay, well, that was nearly 4 hours of stuff that I have never used before, soaking into my brain. That was quite a bit. I didn't see anything in there that I could not follow the logic and what was happening. Now, I don't know all the syntax for all that. I couldn't go back and do all of it right now, but I didn't really, other than just the muscle memory of typing some of that syntax out while he's doing it. I didn't see the benefit of actually going through and typing it out with him because I wanted to focus on what was being said and how it worked, as opposed to just typing it and trying to keep up and missing a lot of the explanation and the the thought process behind what was happening. And because I know I've got a whole bunch of projects coming up where I'm going to put all that into practice, I'll have a way where I can practice it, see my, you know, my issues and where I don't understand things, and then also be able to go back and recreate that same project over and over and over again until I can do it from memory, but not just because I memorized it, because I actually know exactly what's happening with each piece of the code. But that's going to be a tomorrow thing because my brain is a little bit right now. So, after going through those first, how many sections was that? Let's see here. So 3 hours and 40 minutes. That was the section, first 3 sections. We're almost got halfway through, and we have a lot of projects to do from here on out. And I'm pretty excited to do it. I just don't want to do it at the moment. I haven't, man. I kind of want to do it, but I also kind of don't. No, I don't want to like burn myself out. I'm gonna keep it for tomorrow. I'm gonna soak on the information, think about it. I'm not gonna get off. I'm just gonna play some games or something else, a little bit less stressful on the brain. I haven't played anything all weekend. Oh, I spent earlier this week learning Golang on, or all the syntax for Golang, and doing a project on there. So I didn't really settle down at all or have any relaxing time. So I'm probably gonna chill out for a little bit and play something. I just don't know what that's gonna be yet. But until I figure that out, I'm gonna actually hop off here, go grab some chow, some food, and probably take a shower really quick and brush my teeth, and then come back and play something for the evening. But I'll be back here in a little bit. Go ahead and can I bookmark this? Is that actually? Actually, it should save. It should save. I already have it saved, I think. I'll be back here in a little while.